Well, all I can say is that I'm glad I wasn't on a Delta commuter flight coming out of LaGuardia. I don't know if any of you have heard, but a a plane, a Delta commuter plane, slid off the runway at New York's LaGuardia Airport and ran into a fence. Nobody got hurt, but I'm not the world's best flyer, Kevin. I avoided it for many a year. And then, to visit friends who lived, in Florida or South Carolina, it was not practical for me to drive down there, so I eventually had to just take the plunge and fly. But I've had a few harrowing incidents when it came to travel. What was, is there any time that you had a really scary incident on a plane?
I've never had, you know, I had one wind shear where I was coming into a Newark airport, and we were right on approach, and all of a sudden, the nose dipped a little bit, and then it was a dramatic pull-up, and we aborted the landing, and then the pilot came on and said the wind shear warning went off, and he just didn't feel it was safe, so he had pulled up. And then, I've had a couple of times I've had planes take off, and the pilot came on and said, it's probably okay, but we've got some warning lights going off here, so we're going to go back to the airport. I've had that happen, but for the most part, I've been flying for over 30 years for business, and spent more than 3 years of my life on the road. But I haven't had anything too scary. I've had some times when I wondered whether we should have taken the plane up. But early in my career, I did a story on the Cape Cod Baseball League, and I had gone there, and for reasons that are still unclear to this moment, I didn't take which at that point was a Radio Shack computer to write my story there. And they had changed their mind about when the story was going to be due. It was going to be written the following week, but they wanted it quicker. And I didn't have a computer, and I was new there, and I didn't want to admit that I hadn't taken a computer because I had expected to write the story, at a much later date. And I got fogged in on Cape Cod. I didn't, all the cars were gone from the rent-a-car, so I couldn't drive to Logan. And I was at the airport, and a guy came in, and this is really what happened. It was one of those little commuter planes that you take back, and there was like 5 people on the plane. It was just a real small plane, and a guy came in and said, "Is anyone looking for a lift?" And he was about a 70-year-old pilot. That's the way he looked. And he looked outside at the fog, and he said, "Oh hell, I'll take her up. Anybody want to go?" And I raised my hand, and I got on the plane with him just because I needed to get back. But you know, it wasn't all that bad. I mean, once you got above the fog, it was fine. But it was probably not the smartest decision I ever made. But that was 30 some years ago.
Yeah, I hadn't flown since I was like 7 years old, and then in my early 30s, finally, like I said, took the plunge. And of course, the first time I fly out of Buffalo, it was in a teeming rainstorm, and you could feel the plane bumping up and down. And when I'm on a future trip, when I was landing in Washington as a connecting flight, we were coming into Reagan, and I believe you come in over the Potomac.
Yeah.
And when you were coming in, there was sort of that wind shear thing, and I swear we were getting pushed down into the river. And I remember there was a plane crash into the Potomac in I think 1981, and all I had were these visions of people like climbing out of the ice of the Potomac, and I'm like, I'm gonna end up there, and obviously I'm okay because I'm here. But the other one was I had to fly down for a friend's wedding in South Carolina. It was on a weekend. Flew to New York City into LaGuardia, and there was a massive storm, a lot of wind, and a lot of snow. Or not, yeah, it was not a rain and a lot of wind going into LaGuardia, and it was really bad going in. Then flying down to South Carolina, the weather was fine. Flying back in, no problem. That was the weekend before Hurricane Sandy, and if I would have flown, and her wedding might have been scheduled for the following weekend, and if it had been, I would have flown it being flying into LaGuardia when it was under a foot and a half of water. So it was just good timing, but that was rather harrowing. But hey, Russ.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Is it a little cold in your place?
Well, it's a state of emergency here in New Jersey, so
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Wonder if they'll call in the Army like they do here.
Yeah, because the Army's good to help shovel you out.
brother. Well, okay. Well, let's get started here. We'll go.
Hey, before we do, it's kind of hockey related since it's Happy Gilmore, but
Yeah.
if anyone had an opportunity to see it, Bob Barker and Adam Sandler renewed their rivalry, if you will. They did a sketch for the autism, a big comedy festival to support autism, and it's pretty funny. If you guys get a chance, go take a look at it. I tweeted the link out on my Twitter.
Nice.
Okay.
Funny.
Yeah. I always like seeing somebody beat up an old man. That's always.
Well, did you watch it? I sent it to you.
I watched it. I did.
It was pretty funny, huh?
Yeah, it was okay. It wasn't
Funny
bad.
as Adam Sandler's been in 15 years.
Yeah, that's the problem. Adam Sandler is not like my type of humor. There's been like movies that have been okay, but in
Those
general,
were
I don't think his movies are that great. So
Blended wasn't bad though. I like Blended.
yeah. All right. Well, okay. Let's get started here. We'll go Russ, Kevin, and Josh. And yes, Josh Rimmer is the star of apparently has been mentioned prominently on Hockey Central today by ex-Leaf, now Columbus Blue Jacket David Clarkson, who after 3 games is out for the season with a torn oblique muscle. I really feel for the guy. He just can't seem to buy a break. But
he's a good guy too. I've interviewed him. He's a good guy.
Yeah,
he's a really good dude.
Okay, let's get started. It is Thursday, March 5th, and I'll do the intro, and here we go. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Thursday, March 5th, 2015.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today.
I'm Josh Rimmer.
And I'm Michael Lagello, and this is the Hockeybuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Eklund is unfortunately unavailable due to a ice storm in suburban Philadelphia, so we will forge forth with the 4 of us to talk about the games in the NHL last night and some other happenings in the world of hockey. First, the Ottawa Senators Winnipeg game. Kevin, the Senators won 3-1 last night. And if you look at the standings, I don't think anybody expected the Ottawa Senators to be in the position that they are in right now with a little over a month to go in the regular season. They are 4 points within the second wild card spot of the Boston Bruins. And if you look at the standings, they're probably better positioned to challenge Boston since they are equal in games played, and Florida and Philadelphia have played 2 more games. Andrew Hammond, the goaltender. Apparently he's nicknamed the Hamburglar, and he is 6-0-1 after being called up from Binghamton. I didn't expect this. Do you think that the Ottawa Senators have any chance to catch the Bruins and make the playoffs?
Well, they've made a believer out of me. Like, it's helped them that they didn't have so many teams to climb over, which is always an issue when you're way behind. Not only do you got to make up the points, but there are teams between you that are also winning. And in their case, they've now managed to emerge from the pack a little bit. They just have the Florida Panthers. And I think why they do have a shot is other than their goalie, who's super hot and maybe the hottest of his career, they're not dependent upon someone maintaining a hot streak. Like, they've just sort of come together as a team. They had issues earlier in the season, and now have sort of come together. So I think they've got a shot. I think they've been helped by the fact that the Bruins have not played like the Bruins. If the Bruins had been, lived up to even close to their expectations, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But I wouldn't want to put. Well, I guess I do want to put odds on it. I would say they, maybe have a 10-15% chance because the Bruins are still a superior team, but you have to give credit to the Senators, who have really played well.
Russ, I would have thought that any chance that Ottawa would have to be competitive this year would have depended on Craig Anderson standing on his head, or maybe the emergence of Robin Lehner. But I mean, it's not unprecedented to see a goaltender called up from the AHL and stand on his head for a couple weeks. But you look at Hammond's statistics at Binghamton. His goals against was over 3. His save percentage was in, I think, the 870s, and now he's 6-0-1. And he was primarily responsible for their win last night against the Jets. I mean, I think there's some talent there with Ottawa, but they're sort of like in the midst of a rebuild, and they did fire Paul McLean and bring in Dave Cameron. But what do you think of this run that they're on, and do you think that they have a chance?
Well, I'll tell you, I've always liked Cameron as a coach from his junior days. Very solid. I got to see him away from the rink, too, a couple of times with his team and how he treated them. And I think they rally around this guy. And I think he has kept them on an even keel and not let them get too high or too low, as the cliche goes. And I think, look, the Bruins have kept the door wide open for him. And I think the NHL, you're always 5 wins or basically 5 wins, 5-0-1 situation from being in a playoff spot. I mean, if you're a halfway competitive team, that's always the case. And as far as the AHL goalie, I mean, look, John Gibson may have started the year in the NHL, then went back to the AHL, and then now he's back in the NHL, and he's hot again. So what I think this is also teaching us, and we've learned this and been talking about it for a couple of years now on our prospect show on XM, is that the AHL is a lot better than the average person thinks. If they're not watching it very often or even more than a few times a year, there's a lot more talent in the AHL than has been there since the lockout.
And that's a good segue, because that was the next person in the next game I was going to talk about was Anaheim and Montreal. It ended up 3-1 in favor of the Ducks. And Gibson, who made an appearance in the playoffs last year and I thought played pretty well for a 20-year-old, made 37 saves last night in that 3-1 victory. Kevin, to me, if Gibson and he's 9-5-0 right now, his save percentage is around 925, and I remember you were talking a couple shows ago about like the median number for NHL goaltenders, and if you were above 917, you were pretty well, and he's 925, so he's doing pretty good. But I think that if it's a battle between him and Frederik Andersen going into the playoffs, I think Boudreau is going to go with John Gibson. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the start of the season, I think people were predicting that at some point Gibson was going to steal the net. I mean, he is a high-level prospect. I'm sure Russ can speak to it as well. But this is a guy. This is why everyone's afraid of that under-23 team at the World Cup, because he's going to be the goalie for that team. And we've seen him, win championships and rise up and perform at such a level that he can carry a team. So this is not unexpected. I mean, this is a high-level premium prospect, the best American goalie prospect since Rick DiPietro, was a high pick. This is one of the guys that I think everybody said before the season, if there's a guy who could step in and have an impact for a team and really make a difference, it would be him. So I'm not surprised at this, and I think this is what they were kind of hoping in the back of their mind would happen, that he would emerge and kind of steal the net. And they've got it's too bad Eklund's not here, because they got 2 good options in net, unlike a lot of teams, because Andersen is a pretty effective goalie as well, and I think he has a lot of potential. But I think Gibson has superstar potential. I don't know that there are too many goalies young goalies that are talked about as much as him. The Russian kid, obviously, in Tampa Bay is the other guy that comes to mind. But Gibson is a pretty special young player.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Eck would like Frederik Andersen more than Carter Hutton. Russ, I think Anaheim. I mean, they're at the top of the league right now with 91 points, I believe. They bolstered themselves at the deadline, added a few players like Fleischman. I think they have to be taken seriously, obviously, but until Boudreau and that team get further along, there are always going to be some doubters. Do you think that a guy like Gibson, who clearly has, as Kevin said, superstar potential as a goaltender, is going to be the guy that they go with, or do you think they might go back to Andersen?
No, I think they'll stay with Gibson. I think they wanted to use him all along, and then for whatever reason there was that hiccup. And when they sent him down the AHL, I had a chance to sort of observe him in Lehigh Valley just for a game, and it was really after the game that he sort of impressed me, because he was sort of joking around with the players, keeping them loose, and they sort of, I could tell they were looking at him as a leader already, and he was not gone for that long, but he wasn't there for that long either. And so he has that effect on his team. He gives the team a lot of confidence. And that's no slight to Anderson, because I think Anderson is a really good goalie, but I don't think he could give that kind of confidence that Gibson can when he runs a hot streak. And he's really capable, and he has a pedigree. And everything Kevin said about him is true, and everything you said about Anaheim is true, because the only one who could beat Bruce Boudreau is Bruce Boudreau. Last year they had the team that really should have gone tremendously far, and he outsmarted himself by the way he was sort of shortening the bench and played his team. And so we'll see what he does this year. But the pickup of Fleischmann was great. I mean, they're putting all the tools in there for Boudreau to succeed. If he doesn't succeed now, there's a problem.
Yeah, I would even go further on Gibson and say that it's been my observation in covering the league for a long time that certain goalies have auras, that get inside players' heads, and Gibson's one of those kind of goalies. Like, you start to believe. I mean, he looks invincible. Quick has an aura. Patrick Waugh had one, Marty Brodeur, and I think Gibson over time will develop that aura as well, where you just feel, boy, there appears to be no net. When he enlarges himself, in the crease, there just seems to be no room. And everybody kind of knows his history, that he's won everywhere he's been. He's this guy that's already won a bronze medal at the World Championships. He's a young player, and
tough city like Pittsburgh, right? So he's got the right makeup. Yeah,
and I just see as time goes on, we're going to be talking about him in those terms, where guys after games, the playoff games against them, are just going to kind of exhale and going, well, he just had it today, but deep down they're thinking, boy, we got to figure out a way to solve him.
Yeah, and he's 21, and strangely, I think that you could compare the aura that he has to the guy who was at the other end of the ice in Carey Price. Although Carey Price went through his struggles early with the Canadiens and was challenged by Halak in that one playoff series or run in 2010. But now Carey Price, after winning the gold medal, seems to be an almost invincible. But to illustrate or to extend on the point that I've made about the Canadiens after the deadline, last night they had 38 shots on goal against Anaheim, scored once. Again, I question, and Price was mortal last night. He gave up 2 goals and then the empty netter. If they can't score more than a goal a game, Kevin, again, I don't know whether this team can go far in the postseason.
Well, we talked about that at length. I thought they should have, and wrote a column about it. They should have gotten, another offensive player, even if it's just someone to bolster their secondary scoring. Obviously we all like Pacioretty, and Plekanec is a pro's pro, as I like to say. Galchenyuk is a star on the rise. They just don't have enough of them. And I think defense and goaltending win championships, to be sure, but you have to have some goals in the playoffs, and they're much more difficult to come by. So if they're having trouble scoring in the regular season, it's not going to get any easier when they get in the postseason. So, yeah, I mean, that was a measuring stick game for Montreal, a team that I think has been maybe the most consistent. You can make an argument that it's either Montreal or Nashville has been the most consistent team all season. But, boy, Anaheim has looked impressive, and they've added Wisniewski to the mix, which I think is going to raise their compete level on the blue line. That's what Wisniewski reminds me of. He's kind of the ultra competitor. He'll do what it takes in order to try to be successful, and guys like him because of that. And so, this Anaheim team, I think the best indication of what kind of chances they have is all season long the Las Vegas odds have them up there as a team that has a chance to win. The average fan believes in them, and I think people in the NHL community believe in the Ducks as well. They have a lot of talent there.
Yeah, they received a little bit of a scare last night because Getzlaf took a shot off the foot, but he ended up coming back at the end of the game. If they lost him for any significant time, it would be a blow. But Russ, just touching on the Canadiens right now, last year their success was, I think, focused on the ability of them to get secondary scoring from players that nobody expected, from Bourque, from Weiss, from Danny Briere to an extent. They don't have any of those. Well, they have Weiss, but I don't think they can logically expect Dale Weiss to score at the pace that he did last year in the playoffs. That to me, like I would want to take Montreal in a playoff hockey pool if they had one more scorer to get through the Atlantic Division and to get into the Eastern Conference Final like they did last year.
Yeah, but I think they rise to the occasion. I saw a different gear for Galchenyuk and some of the other guys. I think they're missing Michael Ryder a little bit, to be honest. Ryder was a bit of a force for them at times last year. He's always streaky, but he had some games that he was good. I also look, I think last year the only reason the Rangers beat him was because Price was out. I think if Price was in there, it would have gone 7, and then it would have been anybody's guess. But that was the only reason they were able to really sort of take over that series, the Rangers. I think Montreal, we're talking about them like we would talk about the New Jersey Devils. They never scored enough either, but yet they managed to move on and win, and they had great goaltending, a good defense, and Montreal's got those things now, and Montreal's a good fourth line too, and maybe Weiss isn't going to score at that pace, but I like their fourth line, and I think it works really hard, and I don't know, I think they have some of the right things in place. They just have to have guys get hot, and they still have time for that. This is probably just their downslope right now in the ebb and flow of the season.
Yeah, and what we do like about Montreal is that they're a good character team. Like you look at the guys they have up front. These are guys that they're dependable. They're guys in the room that are going to give 100%. There's no issues there. So, I think that is probably mitigates some of the concern over the fact that they don't have enough scoring, as they do have a character team of guys that with a little bit of history of being able to rise up.
Now the other interesting game last night was between two expected playoff teams in the Red Wings and the New York Rangers. Detroit won 2-1 in overtime on a goal by new Red Wing Meredith Zidlicki. It was sort of a scramble in the crease, and he just shoveled it over the line. First on the Rangers, Kevin, they're 7-1-2 with Cam Talbot in goal. I don't think anybody could have expected them to have that kind of record of success without Henrik Lundqvist. I read a report this morning that said Lundqvist is doing better and is expected to be back well in advance of the playoffs. We talked about how we thought that they were one of the teams that did the most to improve their chances, but I think if Lundqvist repeats his performance of last year in the playoffs, they are my favorite to make the final in the Stanley Cup from the East.
Well, obviously, I was at the game last night, and I have several observations. One, I know Russ was not a big fan of Talbot being able to step up. His numbers have been not quite Lundqvist-esque, but he was like, his save percentage is .917 versus like .922 for King Henrik, and his goals against average was .950 as opposed to, or excuse me, .250 as opposed to .220. But I will say this: when you watch the Rangers play in front of Talbot, it's different than when they play in front of Lundqvist, obviously. And last night, I thought there were too many rebounds, in situations where you could just tell that I think if Lundqvist would have been in goal, they could have won that game 1-0. The Red Wings were playing well, but I just felt that you could just see the difference in the team when Lundqvist isn't there. But I like this team a lot, and I think the Yandel acquisition is really going to pay off. I watched them closely last night. And what I love about the situation is that the Rangers are one of the teams where Lundqvist, whatever warts he has, are not a factor, because they have so many players that can play strong defensively that all they really need Yandel to do is to be a difference maker on offense, and he can certainly do that. I think he's still adjusting. Like he wasn't the same player for the Rangers last night that he is for the Coyotes, but I've seen him enough in person to know what he can do. And he's going to be a lot of fun for that offense because they're a great skating team. He'll be able to move and jump into them. He's got to get accustomed to playing with this group, and that's going to take some time. But I don't disagree with you. I think they're a real factor to get to the finals. I love their defense now. I rattled it off the other day, but it bears repeating. Girardi, McDonough, Stahl, Klein, Boyle, and Yandel. I mean that's a pretty fascinating group of defenders. And then Lundqvist will be back, and a great skating team up front, fun to watch. And the big bonus was, we talked the other day, Zuccarello. On Thursday and Friday there's stuff being written like he's gone, and now he's still with the team, and that just adds to it. So I like this Ranger team a lot. I watched it closely last night. I saw a lot there that I thought, boy, they're going to be difficult to beat. The only problem they have is, and why I'm reluctant to say they're the favorite, is, the Canadiens have been consistently good all season. The Lightning are a better team. The Islanders are a better team. There's a lot more potholes out for this year's playoffs than there were last season. They're going to have to be better than they were last season, in my opinion, to get to the final.
Russ, I saw the first game that Yandel played more than last night, and I know that they paired him with Dan Boyle most of the night, and I get the feeling that that's not going to be permanent, because if Boyle to me fits in as a 5'6", and I would expect if once Yandel gets up to speed, he's going to be playing in the top 4. But I mean, when Lundqvist comes back, I think they have the depth of offense. They have, I think, the best defense, the best defensive core in the Eastern Conference. I think Nashville's probably the best in the West, but but Kevin's point is accurate. The Islanders are going to be tough. Pittsburgh are going to be tough. It's not going to be easy for them to get out of the Metro.
No, it's about the matchups, and there's a few things. So the one thing that Detroit did great last night was puck possession, and they killed the Rangers for, I want to say, 60% of that game with puck possession. The Rangers are still not a great puck possession team. They're a good team to capitalize on mistakes, and they wait for your mistakes, and they have the speed, and they'll make their breakout passes, and when they do get spurts going, and they seem to get it going at the right time, so that part works well for them. The defense is solid. There's no question about it. Their puck moving is better. Their face-offs still aren't great, and Shepard's improved it slightly because Hayes was 37.5%, so now you got Shepard at 50, and he made his debut last night winning his first face-off, so everybody went goo-goo gaga. But when you look at it, there's at least a slight improvement there. And I said the same thing about Yandel that Kevin just did. It takes a little while for a defenseman to sort of settle in, especially with a group that's so used to playing together like they are. So Klein will be the guy that eventually moves down a notch, which is probably better for him anyhow, because he's a guy that if you play 15, 17 minutes, he gives you the best 15, 17 minutes that you can get. But the minute he gets around 20, 21, I've seen mistakes sort of creep into his game, and I like him better as a 15 to 17 sort of minute guy. So I think that sort of helps, and I think that's another reason why they got Yandel. But the other thing I want to give the Red Wings credit for is they could play the Rangers in a playoff series. They will take them to 7, and they didn't mortgage it at the deadline like the Rangers did. And that's where I give the Red Wings credit, because they're going to play their hockey, and they still played their hockey yesterday, and they're still going to defeat a lot of teams in the playoffs with their game. They will.
Kevin Zidlicki, of course, played last night since he scored the game-winning goal. I don't know if Cole got in the lineup, but how do you think the new additions with that that team are going to sort of mesh and help the Red Wings in their pursuit of playoff glory?
Well, it was interesting. I actually thought that Cole would make the adjustment easier than Zidlicki. But as it turned out, when I watched the game last night, I thought it was the other way around. I thought Zidlicki looked a lot more comfortable, and I think Cole was just kind of finding his way a little bit with his line mates. He didn't seem to have the instant chemistry, but it was clear. Like Cole's speed, it fits in well with the Red Wings. They're a very fast team now. They got guys that can motor. Nyquist can motor. Tatar can motor. There's a lot of skaters on this team, and Eric Cole fits in very well with them. And now he adds an element of grit and size, which really helps him. But Zidlicki really looked comfortable right off the bat. They already had the best power play in the league, and now they've got a different weapon with the right-hand shot from the opposite side. And he looked. Even before he scored a goal, he had a nice shot that they didn't have the capability of doing that, because they literally have but only one like right-handed shot before he showed up. So I think the Red Wing team has really kind of come together. They've been probably one of the biggest surprises in the Eastern Conference. It's kind of the merging of the old Red Wings with Zetterberg and Datsuk, and with the new generation of Tatar and Nyquist, and they're a pretty effective team. And Howard played well, and he has continued to kind of show that he is among the top 10 goalies in the league. He's probably somewhere in their 8, 9, 10 range, somewhere like that. But he's that was a big time performance yesterday by him. And their defense, while not there's no stars on that defense. I mean, Cronwell is the biggest name. It's been a pretty effective unit. They play good team defense on the Red Wings.
Now let me ask you this, Kev, because I watched the first 2 periods. I was at a book signing with Ron Duguay, actually a former Ranger and Red Wing, so that was kind of fun. But The thing was, on the way home, Dave Maloney went crazy over the Stepan penalty, and I'll put it in quotes because they didn't feel like it should have been called. And then, of course, right after it, Brassard gets called for a slash. And my feeling was, hey, I'm listening to a hometown broadcast, but they went overboard, because even if there was a real penalty or not on Stepan, my point is, why does Brassard have to go with the retaliatory slash right after? If he'd have had some discipline, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I would agree with that. I actually thought it was a penalty. I think it was one of those cases where, because it was that time in the game, I think the Rangers felt it shouldn't have been called. But he had his arm around him. He took his hand off his stick. And if that had happened in the first period, I don't think the Rangers would have said anything. I thought it was kind of the timing of it. Like, and you know what I'm talking about. It's like there's just this belief that if the time of the game, that the standard changes. That it's got to be a real penalty in order to call it then. And it, obviously had a huge impact on the game. So, I understand why they were upset. It was a tight game. They wanted the boys to decide it, and they felt like the referee did. But I did think it was a penalty.
Now, after the trade deadline, the biggest news that'll come out for a number of teams is injuries. It can affect the ability of a team that is bound for the playoffs to, whether they're going to be able to make it or not, or not make it or not, but how deep they can go. Obviously, Patrick Kane's injury affected the Blackhawks, but it was before the deadline, and they were able to make a number of moves to compensate for that slightly. But after the deadline, we've seen, even though Columbus is not a playoff-bound club, they get David Clarkson from Toronto, and Clarkson in his third game tears an oblique, and he is out for the season. The Ducks brought in James Wisniewski. He suffered a deep bone bruise on his foot in his last game with the Blue Jackets, and it's unknown how long it's going to be before he gets into the lineup with the Ducks. But the strangest one, which happened yesterday, was Brett Connolly for the Boston Bruins. They trade 2 second-round picks. Instead of going out for a rent-a-player, they go out and get a young forward in Connolly, who I think it's safe to say hasn't reached his potential yet. And he gets hit by a Dennis Seidenberg slap shot in practice and breaks a finger, and he's out for 4 to 6 weeks, and probably the rest of the regular season. Kevin, it just seems like Columbus and Boston, there should be some sort of exorcism right now, because they just seem to be just ripped by injuries constantly.
Yeah, no, the Conley loss is a difficult one, because I thought that was kind of a shrewd move, as we've talked about, while everybody was concentrating on the rentals, and the Bruins had been connected to either Vermette or Stewart, and it looked like that's what they were going to do. They obviously needed to add someone who could play on the wing, or at least play in their top 6 forwards because of all the injury. They went out and got what I thought was a shrewd move. They paid to get a younger guy that they felt could help them now and also be part of their future, and then for him to go down. And it really just kind of sums up how their season has gone. And I'm sure if you're Peter Chiarelli, you're going, oh my gosh, this is just a season, a nightmarish season. And I'm sure he's feeling pressure, because the expectations of this team, it's a little bit different than what you see in Florida or Columbus or even Philadelphia, where I'm not sure that I think the people had high expectations or hoping that the team would get in this season, but they weren't as positive as the fans of the Bruins, who just expected not only were they going to get in the playoffs, but compete for the Stanley Cup, and they haven't been that team at all. So for Connolly to go down when it was such a good move, I felt, just as insult to injury, it's the the rocks landing on the the Coyote after he's fallen off the mountain. I mean, it's just tough luck and just a continuation of a very poor season.
Russ, it's tough to factor in what kind of effect Conley would have had on the Bruins. I mean, they did add a veteran, Max Talbot, who will help their bottom six. I don't think he can really fit into a top six role. He's not that type of player anymore. But, I mean, this is a tight race. I mean, Philadelphia is not out of it. Florida has their injury problems of their own. They'll be starting Dan Ellis tonight. And
is Tallis backing him up?
Yeah, no. They called up a goalie from the ECHL, but I want to touch on that in a second, the whole third goalie thing. But I mean, the Bruins just seem to not have the good fortune, not have the good luck this year. They just can't buy a break.
Yeah, here's the thing. If I'm Chiarelli, I am going to call up Alexander Kovalchev and I'm going to let him play. Don't give him just a 3-game look-see. He's been scoring a bucket load of points in the AHL. I had a chance to chat with him and see sort of a little bit of his talent over the summer. I think he's ready mentally and physically, and I think this guy just needs some ice time. And I would give it to him because he has a load of talent and he's got speed, and if there's anything the Bruins need, is they need both of those things. And you saw what happened. They got an infusion with Pastrnak, and maybe he's sort of leveled out a little, but there's still going to be upside there. And I think you need to do the same thing with Kovalchev and roll the dice on your youth, because that's all you have right now. And Connolly, I think, would have helped him because, look, he was scoring goals and not getting all the ice time and the right opportunities for Tampa, and he can play a physical game. Now, Kovalchev's not going to be physical, but he's got finesse and he's got those other moves, and I'd probably put him with a Pastrnak and another veteran, and let's see what they've got. Because you know what? Sometimes a kid line can bring a team out of this, and they need something, and that's what I would do. As far as the goalie thing, in Philly a couple weeks ago, I looked at this, and I was talking to off-ice officials because we didn't know if Rob Zepp was going to make it back from the Maritimes, and both Emery and who am I leaving out? Mason were hurt, and they didn't know who was going to be able to play, and so we were talking about what can you do, and supposedly the off-ice official said you only get that roster at the beginning of the game, and those are the only guys that are allowed to play. But, and we kept looking at the rule books and looking at everything, and then sure enough, Tallis shows up on the bench because we were wondering, like, who's going to suit up for the Flyers? Is it going to be Derek? Is it going to, the equipment guy? Who are they going to put out there? Is it going to be their goalie coach? Is it going to, Reese used to play for Tampa, right? So, I don't know, when's the last time he was in net? Maybe like 98 or something, but so maybe it would have been Jeff Reese. And all of a sudden it happened. So I think there's a lot of confusion with that rule, to be honest.
Well, apparently in the Florida situation, Luongo was at a nearby hospital getting a CT scan, and when he heard about this, he jumped into a car and drove back to the BB&T Center. So it's it's like Keystone Cops. But Bob McKenzie from TSN mentioned something yesterday, and it was interesting. And there's precedent in this in Major League Baseball where teams after the August 31st waiver trade deadline can trade for a player, but the thing is that the player is not eligible for the postseason. I remember Dave Henderson back in the day was traded. I can't remember what team it was. It may have been San Francisco that traded for him. The old Boston Red Sox outfielder.
Actually, your Yankees traded for Dave Kingman, and he wasn't on the postseason roster, but he hit like 5 or 6 homers down the stretch for him.
Right, and McKenzie had talked to someone in the NHL and had mentioned, and apparently the rule was ambiguous of whether a team could trade for a player after the trade deadline, in the sense that they would be eligible to play in the regular season but not in the playoffs, and then got sort of a clarification from the league that said, no, any player that's traded after the deadline is ineligible to play in the regular season and the playoffs. But there was no hard and fast rule, you can or cannot do this. It's like, I don't know. I mean, right now you look at the Florida Panthers and they're starting Dan Ellis, who I think is not an NHL goaltender anymore, and I can't even remember the name of the ECHL goaltender. You know, if there's the wherewithal to go out and get somebody to fill in at the, to go out and, I mean, they could go out and sign Brizgalov now as a free agent, but they can't go out and make a trade in an emergency situation. I'm not sure if I agree with that, Kevin.
No. Well, sometimes it takes a situation like this to get a rule change, but I say this all the time. Sometimes you need the event to create the rule, and we saw that when the puck went up and the referees didn't see it, and it ended up back in play. It was the L.A. versus Detroit, and it ended up being a goal, and it shouldn't have been. And what happened? They changed the rule. So I think, unfortunately, it doesn't help the Panthers, but I bet this is something that'll get talked about now at the GM meetings, because it's come up. But, I mean, you just can't anticipate every little thing that's going to happen. Yeah. Although, the loss of a goalie, that's certainly been because of the number of injuries. You would think that would have come up by now. But, signing Brizgalov, I mean, wouldn't be a horrible option at this point.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's any. I mean, I've heard people suggest that teams should be carrying an emergency third goaltender, but that's another roster spot, so I can't see the NHL and the PA sort of agreeing on that. I mean, just to touch on the Western Conference playoff race here, because it seems that catastrophic injuries are going to factor in who makes the postseason in the West. I mean, we've already heard about Giordano basically being done for the year with the Flames, but the Flames are still holding on by their fingernails to third place in the Pacific. The Winnipeg Jets, and it's uncertain now how serious this injury, but Dustin Byfuglien left the game against Ottawa yesterday with an upper body injury, and there's speculation that it might be of a serious nature. Kevin, they have 76 points right now. They're 4 points up on LA and San Jose for one of the wild card spots. But if they lose Byfuglien, I don't know if Winnipeg can hold on.
No, he is such an impact player. And I think it's one of those things when you watch him live too, you realize what an impact he has. Just because the game is Byfuglien centric. What he does, the way he is away from the play, it becomes a major issue. It was I remember watching a game on television earlier this year against Philadelphia, and the Flyers were paying more attention to him than what was actually happening in the game, in my opinion. I mean, he is an impact player, very popular with his teammates. I think they. He's a sort of a leader because of that, although that's not really his personality. He's a rather quiet guy, doesn't talk and say a lot, but he's very well respected by his teammates. When I was on embedded with the U.S. Olympic selection process, that's one of the things that came out and was talked about a lot, that Dale Talon, who had him when he was with the Blackhawks, and Stan Bowman also pointed out that he is very, very popular with teammates. And so for him to go down, I think would be, I agree with you, I think it would be a devastating blow for this team.
Now, Russ, Calgary lost Giordano. He's obviously, I think, he's their MVP. They're in the middle of an 8-game road swing. I think they have 4 games left to go. But after that, the majority of their remaining schedule is at home. I mean, right now they're tied with LA and San Jose. I mean, is there any way that this team holds on, or do you think the loss is a bridge too far for the Flames?
I think it's too much for the Flames, and I think it's too much for Winnipeg. I think you're going to see LA and San Jose creep back in it. I mean, LA's got 2 games in hand on Winnipeg. So if Winnipeg does lose Byfuglien even for a little bit of time, that's probably going to be it for them, because they're going to be in danger of the Kings for sure. The Sharks are really a weird team because they were buyers, they're sellers. What the heck are they? They don't know what they are. Nobody knows. But, at the end of the day, they have enough veterans that if they get it together for a short time, they could sneak in. Now, will they be a first-round exit? They might be. They very well might be, but they could be a team that sneaks in at the end and pushes out one of these young teams. It wouldn't shock me. They're certainly not out of it, and they have enough guys that if they get it going for a little, again, 5-game winning streak. Somebody puts together a 5-game winning streak. These teams lose 3 or 4 in a row, or they go with a couple ties and overtime losses. all of a sudden they're out of contention. It'll happen.
Yeah,
let me respectfully disagree on about the Calgary Flames, just because I think they're a team. I think we all accept that Giordano is the most important player on that team, even more important than their goaltending, in my opinion. He's had an unbelievable season. He's their guy. He's their leader.
A Norris guy, right?
Pardon me? Yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, absolutely. But saying all that, I think this team this season, is about sort of like Colorado was last season, where the Flames. Last season Colorado won a lot of one-goal games. They felt good about themselves. They went in expecting to be able to win those close games. This Calgary team is a team that's had 10 wins where they've come from behind in the third period. They have that sort of confidence about them as well, and I think this losing Giordano, it's another thing for them to rally behind. I think they're going to hang in there. I think they're going to be one of those teams. They've got good survival skills, as I like to say, and I think they have a terrific record against the Pacific. They've played well. They've got a couple of there's a game with the LA Kings, I think the second last game of the season, and I wouldn't be surprised if that game decides it. I think they're going to hang in there. I just have a feeling that they're going to hang in there.
Yeah, I'm rooting for them. But want to touch on one more thing before we go to the news here. Maple Leafs forward Richard Panik was fined $2,000 for embellishment/diving by the league today, which is strange because I've watched every Maple Leaf game. I haven't noticed Panik diving, but there's a certain player on the Leafs who has a reputation for embellishing who hasn't been fined one red cent. Kevin, is this a deterrence? I mean, because I think it's
Yeah, it is, and it's not the money; it's just the embarrassment. Guys don't like it. I mean, I've already heard, in dressing rooms, discussion about they don't like being singled out. I mean, because now they're on the list. Everybody knows about it. It's just like I remember a long time ago when the Hockey Digest existed, and they did a couple of those pieces like, captains that referees hate, and the worst, those kind of things. And guys didn't like being on those lists. They liked chirping at the officials, but they didn't like it, when it was in print. And I think the same is true. Like, I think some guys are proud of their acting ability, but when they're out there as divers and everybody acknowledges that now all of a sudden they don't like it so much. So I like this rule. I think it's a good thing. We're trying to clean it up. In the olden days, in the 70s, when Bill Barber was the greatest diver in the league, everybody kind of celebrated that. It was kind of a fun thing. Well, it's not fun anymore because there's too many of them, and it's starting to be a little bit like soccer, where guys look like they've been shot and then they shake it off and come back. We don't want that. We don't want guys, pretending they've been fouled when they really haven't.
Russ, do you believe it's a deterrent?
Yeah, I think exactly what Kevin said is true. And the funny thing about diving is most guys won't admit they did it, but they don't like the fact that they're doing it and don't want you to. It's one of those things where they don't want to catch you talking about them doing it, because it's not like a macho thing, and everybody's sort of, in the dressing room, they don't mind it if it's a guy in their team, but then all of a sudden if there's a light shine on it, they don't want to have a diver on their team. No, nobody here dives, and so it becomes one of those things that I think it will deter some guys. It's not going to deter some stars, though, and that's where you have to wonder, are the stars going to really get fined the same way as a Richard Panik will? That's the part that I want to see if it carries through or not.
Yeah, I just think, and not to say that the player that I'm talking about on the Leafs is a star player, but he's a more prominent player, and everybody knows, and he draws the most penalties in the league, I believe, and he's an artist at embellishment, but maybe he does it so well that people don't catch him. But I don't know. Josh, what do we have for news?
Well, since we've gone over most of it, there's only a couple things I want to bring up. We talked about Calgary and what's going on with Giordano. Well, Calgary today announcing that veterans Yuri Hudler and Dennis Weidman will serve as alternate captains for the remainder of the season, along with Chris Russell, who was part of the original leadership group from the beginning of campaign. Definitely two of the big-time leaders in that locker room to take over some leadership. And I want to bring something up, a funny quote from Nathan McKinnon this morning, talked about Sidney Crosby and his relationship with him and that they are best buds. And his quote was, "Sid was my favorite player growing up, and we're buddies. It's always fun to play against him. He's a little bit more serious than most of my buddies I play against. You usually can talk to your friends, but he's all business on the ice. I just," and then the person asked him, "How so?" He responded by saying, "I just said, hey," and he looked at me and ignored me. He's pretty serious, but that's okay. I don't know if he's mad at me or what. I'll have to see.
Oh, boy. I was going to bring up one more thing here, but I'm drawing a blank. Do you have anything more, Josh?
No, it's. I think we covered everything pretty good.
Okay, time for our NHL Draft Lottery Simulator.
All right, here we go. Get out the straw hat.
It's the Edmonton Oilers.
Woo!
Which, again, I don't know whether the Edmonton Oilers need another quality young forward, but
everybody needs another quality forward.
Yes.
Here's the thing, though. That quality forward is going to be better than any of the young quality forwards they have.
You'll be number one on the list. That's true.
Yeah, I mean they'll have the youngest center core in the league, and which to me, I mean, okay, you have Draisaitl, you have McDavid, and you would have Nugent Hopkins. Is there enough? Is there enough ice time?
At the draft, don't worry. That draft day, if they know they're picking number one, they'll make a deal, guaranteed.
To make a deal for what? Trade one of those other guys?
Trade one of those other guys, yes.
Yeah. No, they're not going to trade. They're not. They're not trading the if they got McDavid or Eichel, they're not trading him.
They know they have number one. They're not trading out of it. No way.
No. But I think they would trade Nugent Hopkins. I think because McDavid would be the number one center, and Draisaitl is big and probably would fit better as a two-way guy as a number two center. But I have a feeling
the most trade value, Nugent Hopkins. He would, so it would make sense.
Yeah. Well, great show, guys. Great job. Thanks, Josh. Thank you, Kevin Allen. Thank you, Russ Cohen. Hopefully we'll have power tomorrow, and we'll be back. And we'll have Ty Anderson for Fridays with Ty. I'm Michael Agello. As Russ puts on his snow gear. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.